So now that we've discussed how we can collect values from the various fields within this form, what we need to do next is we need to hook up our estimate total button. So when the user actually clicks this button, we want to make sure that the form submits and it does the calculations for us. There's a couple different ways that we can do this, but what we ultimately need to do is we need to tell JavaScript to listen for an event. An event is something that happens, and JavaScript can listen for it and then respond to it at that particular time. There's different types of events and different ways that we can listen and respond, but the one that makes the most sense for this particular form is to listen for the click event. So when the user actually clicks our button, that's the event that we want to happen. In addition to that, though, we're also going to want the user to be able to click the return key. So for example, you could type a value into one of these text fields, and then if you hit return, we want the form to get submitted, and that would also cause the event to fire. But if we restrict our event to only a click event on this particular button, then it would not fire. So what we really want to do is we want to listen for when the form is submitted, however that might be done. And we're going to intercept that event and then execute whatever JavaScript we want to have happen. So if we go back into our HTML editor, and we're going to start to add our JavaScript right here. Currently, the JavaScript doesn't have anything in it. What we're going to do first is we're going to add the useStrict. UseStrict is a literal expression, and the purpose of useStrict is to indicate that the code should be executed in strict mode. In strict mode, for example, you cannot use undeclared variables. Strict mode makes it easier to write secure JavaScript. It also will change previously accepted bad syntax into real errors. So if you mistype a variable name and create a new global variable, in strict mode, this is going to throw back an error, making it impossible for you to accidentally create a global variable. In normal JavaScript, the developer or programmer would not receive any error feedback by assigning values to non-writable properties. But in strict mode, an assignment to a non-writable property, a getter-only property, a non-existing property, a non-existing variable, or a non-existing object will all throw errors. So this can help us to troubleshoot our code as we write it. It actually is going to not affect our code other than just helping us to avoid errors. So especially when you're first learning about JavaScript, you might want to use strict, which will just assist you in making sure that your code is clean and well formatted. So what we're going to do next is we're going to go ahead and we're going to add an event listener. And the way that we do this is we call the add event listener method on the element of interest. So in this case, we want to intercept a submit event on the whole entire form. So we're going to use the add event listener, but we need to tell JavaScript which element we should be listening for. So we're going to use our get element by ID. And the ID that we want to use is going to be the ID that is assigned to our form. So the name of our form is cart water. And then we're going to add that event listener. Add event listener is a method, which also means that it's a function. So to call it, we're going to follow the parentheses and pass on two arguments. The first one is going to be the name of the event, which in this case is going to be submit. The event that we're listening for is a string, and it is the submit event. The next argument that gets passed to the function actually does whatever we want it to happen to in response to that particular submit event. So we're going to go ahead and add this comma to separate the arguments, and then in this case we're going to use a named function. So because what we ultimately want to do here is estimate the total, we'll just give this a name of estimate total. Now we haven't defined this function yet, so at this point it's not going to actually do anything, but we'll go ahead and we'll define the function next. So to define the function, we're going to add the function keyword, which just lets JavaScript know that we're going to define a function. Then we're going to put the name of our function, and in this case we want to use estimate total. And then in the parentheses that follow it, in this function definition, we're going to add the argument that it expects to happen. In this case, it's just going to be the argument that's going to call the event. So whenever you add an event listener, the function is able to expect an argument, which indicates that an event has actually been triggered. Now, we know that this is the submit event, which might not really be all that informative at this point. We're going to want to do something a little bit more interesting, but for now, just to test to see that if this is going to work, we're going to add two things. The first thing is we're going to add event.preventDefault. And what this does is it's going to prevent the default behavior from actually firing. And I'll show you what that looks like in just a second. So inside the curly braces of our function, remember this is going to define the function block, we're going to insert the code that we want to occur when the function is called. So as I just mentioned, we're going to take this event and we're going to call its method of preventDefault. Every single event in JavaScript has this, and what this means is do not do what you normally do when this event happens. Only do what we program you to do. So let's go ahead and let's add a line that will just put some text in the console log just so we can really verify that this is happening. I'm going to go ahead and inside the function after the event preventDefault, I'm going to add console.log, and then we'll just have a message, you click submit, that's going to display. So if I save my page and if we go back into the browser, this is what the page looks like without that code. If I click estimate total, you can see that it jumps me to the top of the page. The page basically is reloading by default. If we reload the page right now, the page has our script loaded into it. And I'm going to open up my developer tools and we'll watch the console. When I click estimate total, you're going to see that two things are going to happen. The first one is that the page no longer jumps to the top. We're preventing the default behavior of the submit button. So this is very useful because sometimes when you have different events, especially with buttons, you don't want the page to be jumping around. So you might need to use preventDefault to prevent that behavior from happening. The next thing is you can see that our you click submit message is now displaying in the console. So this message is just being sent when this piece of code is actually executed. So we're just verifying that everything is working. This form was listening for the submit event, at which point it's going to call the estimate total function, which is going to take this argument event, which we use to stop the default action from taking place, and then we're just sending a message to the console log. And so this illustrates how you can intercept any kind of event that happens in a web browser. In this case, we're using the submit event, but most elements have a whole bunch of events that they can respond to, and therefore you can add listeners for those different events.